Howdy, everybody, and welcome back to the Show Up Fitness Podcast. As you can see in the background, we have Jessica, the sports RD, and we're very fortunate to have this hunkette to talk to us about the life of an RD working with some pretty prominent teams from the Clippers and UCLA. Again, thank you for taking your time to chat about nutrition.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
Yeah, so let's just kind of, for the followers, a lot of students will they'll get their certification, whether it's Show Up Fitness CPT or another one, and then like, you know what, I want to learn more about nutrition. And some people will look into the path to become an RD. So let's just kind of start there and what that actually looks like, and then we'll talk about your life and the performance teams and where you're at now.
Yeah, so the path is kind of in an evolution phase right now where there's more requirements now than when I went through. But essentially, in order to become a dietitian, you have to go through an undergrad program focused in nutrition and dietetics. It's a lot of like focused often on like medical nutrition, but we learn all about metabolism, all about how nutrients work in the body, all about how the body works. It's a lot of like pre-med classes as well. So people that go on to be physicians, they might take like a dietetics undergrad in order to meet their pre-med requirements. And then from now, though, 2024 graduates have to actually get a master's degree. That wasn't required before, but now is. And then you have to do 1,200 practice hours, supervised practice hours in various settings. So hospital settings, maybe like public health settings, could be private practice settings, all the different sorts of settings. Do that 1,200 hours. So usually that's like 6 months to a year. And then we take a national credentialing exam to prove that we've learned this stuff. And so all of that's required, and then continuing education. So a big difference from like, so the title is registered dietitian or registered dietitian nutritionist. Some people can just call themselves a nutritionist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're also a registered dietitian. Nutritionist, that title alone doesn't come with those requirements to become a registered dietitian. So someone can use that term without having met all of those requirements. I'll let you, I feel like you have some questions to ask. I'll let you hop in and I'll continue.
I always try to coach up trainers on like the do's and don'ts. It's like, if you have, I don't know, I've had some prominent professors and stuff, and I'll be like, okay, don't fucking say this. Don't say this. Make sure there are such things as stupid questions. And so like when we link up with RDs, the little things like spelling dietitian, does that piss you off if people spell it wrong?
Yeah. I'm not sure how if your audience here, if I can say this, but we like to say, you can take this out if not, keep the tit in dietitian. So it's in DIETITIAN, at least in the US. And like in I think even Canada and like the UK, it would be a C, dietitian with a C, which is how people often spell it. It's kind of more of an annoyance starting off than it is like after a while, you're just like, whatever. But it is often, if people call us a dietitian, though, that's actually like, even if they spell it with a C, that's like so much further than a lot of people get, because we called nutritionalist, nutrition, dietary, all kinds of other terms.
It's like for my mind, when people send me stuff on it, because social media is it's present, and so students, and what do you think about this trainer? And so like I look at an acronym they have their NASM or their ACE, I'll be like, oh god, that's just, they're a textbook trainer, they know what the fuck they're doing. But is that kind of the same way that you view nutritionists? Like when people say, oh, I'm working with a nutritionist, you kind of do like an eye roll, like, oh boy, here we go. What goes on there?
Yeah, I mean, first, because it's such a catch-all term and it could mean someone that actually is a registered dietitian or someone with zero qualifications. I first want to like discern what they're actually talking about. But if it is someone that just got like an online course, or if they've done the NASM, like fitness, nutrition, whatever, like it is an eye roll, because again, I took that course. I took that course before I became a dietitian, and I took it without even cracking the textbook open. I just wanted the certification. So you can do that without having learned anything. And there's so many more levels to it. Like I said, we learn a lot of medical nutrition. There are so many things going on. Like not everybody's a healthy human. They have different things going on that we have to consider. There's food and nutrient interactions to consider, medication interactions to consider, things people might not consider those things or know those things at all if they've just taken like an online course.
I've talked to a few RDs, and I love learning about like the whole dietetic internship, because that's a fascinating phenomenon. I remember a story from someone about the amount of calories that are required for burn victims and how crazy that is, because the skin being the largest organ in the human body, and if you have like 80-90% total skin burn, you need a lot of fuel to help repair that organ. Where there's some unique areas that you were intrigued with that you either were a part of, or kind of like similar cool stories like that you could entertain the followers with?
Yeah, I mean, the hospital setting was certainly, I wasn't something that I was like excited about, but I actually did find it fascinating. And there's just so much to learn there. Like I was working a bunch of different floors and different units, but realistically, you'd probably want to specialize in a specific area like gastrointestinal or cancer, because there's so much to learn about those specific states. I did like a corporate wellness rotation, which was interesting, but it was considered corporate wellness, but I did like, I worked with truckers. And so I was doing like a lot of just like general health and like trying to get chronic illness, trying to help them basically pass their trucking certifications and that sort of thing. So coaching up on just healthy habits in general. And I thought that was an interesting area, especially like trying to help them when they had these like long cross country trips and like figuring out how to make good choices on the road, or maybe even how to cook things and prep things and store things in their truck. So just having to consider like the different lifestyles of people. Not everybody has all this time in their day to like prep meals and eat perfectly, right? Like some people have some very unique scenarios to go through in their day-to-day life that you have to find a way to fit these things in. So just applying nutrition to different types of people is really fascinating for me.
I'm telling Tommy the trucker that he needs to, get his 6 meals all prepped out. Might be kind of hard when you got Buc-ee's there in the Midwest or Texas, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's really fascinating. I'm intrigued by that. And so I know I love talking to PTs and RDs about your careers and where you see yourselves. With PT, it's pretty common that they'll pass their tests and then they'll work at like an insurance-based place, and they want to eventually get into doing stuff like private practice. But you get those golden handcuffs in those areas. Is it kind of similar with an RD once you pass that and you get your master's? Are there like cream of the crop jobs, like in accounting, for example? You have your big four, and where do people strive for within dietetics?
I mean, it would depend on where you want to specialize, right? For me, sports was always the goal. Working with athletes was always the goal. And I mean, realistically, like you can make the most money probably in private practice and working for yourself than working for a team. But working for like a college or working for a team in general, a professional team, that was always kind of seen as like the dream, the career, the dream career, or the cream of the crop in dietetics in sports specifically.
If you don't mind me asking, what does like a starting out of college, year one, you're the dietitian for sports D1? What does that run? 70, 80, 90 million dollars? I don't know.
Wish. It depends on where you're at. It depends on if you're there's some like football will often have their own dedicated dietitian. Basketball teams, at the time I was working for basketball, there weren't a lot of universities with a basketball dedicated dietitian. Now there are more. And then you'll have like a dietitian that kind of covers, or maybe you've got a team, depending on your school and your budget, maybe you've got a couple of dietitians covering all of the rest of Olympic sports. So your gymnasts, your soccer, baseball, everything like that. And so depending on your role, if you're covering a team, or if you're managing other people, how many teams, and where you're located, you probably are starting off at like 50 though, like 45, 50, maybe 60.
And what does that bill come out with an RD? Like, are you get undergrad, depends on where you go, obviously, but like that dietetic internship, what does that cost?
My internship, I paid close to like $15,000 with the cost of the internship and the cost of expenses. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it takes a little bit to pay off those student loans. I've always had like side gigs that I've maintained to kind of offset the lack of financial reward in this career field. But yeah.
Yeah, but you have to learn to be a business savvy individual. And as you said, put the tit back in dietitian. About 95+% of dietitians are female, right?
Actually, yeah, facts.
And then you get into UCLA and you start working with this team. And I love teams because I think that's where we all could learn the most from, in the fact of trainers. Every trainer wants to be a life coach and a corrective exercise specialist. Like, fucking calm down. Just be a trainer and be a really, really good trainer, and network with like-minded individuals, a dietitian, and if you want to have a massage therapist. And so when you look at the sports teams, we usually have a shrink. They're going to get into the mindset on, because we're kids, 18, 19-year-olds, and you're away from mom and dad. Or it's like, I remember when I was at the University of Connecticut, some coach were like, number one rule, guys, no fucking girlfriends. Because if we're in the playoffs and something that goes on because your girl leaves you, like, I don't fucking want to hear your sobbing. It's like, we got to win. And like, that's a realistic scenario. You have to be like, okay, well, you got to have the shrink over there. You got to have athletic trainer and then the strength coach and then the dietitian. And who else is part of that team?
Yeah, strength coach, dietitian, athletic trainer. When you're talking about like on the collegiate level, that's generally like for the basketball teams, that's what it was. And then we had the physician that would come through sometimes. And we had mental health or like a sports psych that would come through sometimes. But that main core team, at least for me, was the strength coach, the athletic trainer, and the dietitian. And so we're kind of like the performance wellness staff. And then we'll kind of have like maybe assistant coach or player development coach would be like kind of the conduit from the head coach if there was anything that we needed to particularly communicate.
Now, was there a push from the teams to get your CSCS or to have some fundamental knowledge within the strength and conditioning side, or was it just focus on the dietetics?
I think different people have different opinions on that for sure. I think it depends on the role too. I think historically strength coaches have been the dietitians, right? The ones kind of get doling out the nutrition advice and working with people on body composition changes. So just as much as like dietitians are like, hey, this is our lane, I think it would kind of be the same thing. Is I think it's really important to understand how the body works and mechanics and kinesiology and everything is if you're in sports and how to apply that. But certainly I think like to your point is we want you to focus on what you're supposed to focus on, right?
So is there a more higher end, because outside of dietetics, like you got to get into the sports side. So is that like the ISSN, or is there a leading body when it comes to sports literature? Like, where do you go if someone were to say, hey, you hear about this new study? Where do you go to make sure that the current information is current?
Yeah. So like you said, ISSN is a good one. I belong to a professional organization called CPSDA, which is Collegiate and Professional Sports Dietetics Association. And part of their membership is monthly. They send out like the latest research update as it applies to sports and performance. And they'll have breakdowns of like, these research studies came out regarding body composition, or these ones came out regarding creatine, or these ones came out about ketogenic diet and endurance athletes. And so it's, usually everything's like on PubMed as well, but it'll be like direct links and summaries. So just kind of belonging in that professional organization is certainly helpful. And then, for people that want to specialize in sports, they'll go on to, you can get I'm a board certified specialist in sports dietetics, which is your CSSD. And that's kind of a differentiator for those working in sports that can say, I've done X amount of years. You got to be at least 2 years working in sports. And I think it's around like 2,000 hours of working with in sports dietetics in some capacity in order to sit for that exam and get that certification.
That's pretty intense. I like that.
Yeah.
I know I would just love to learn more about what that role was when you're working with UCLA. I'm a Zag fan, but Gonzaga and UCLA both suck this year, so it's all right. We can talk about sports.
Yeah. Yeah. So the big part of it is, comes down to catering a lot of times, which is, not always like the thing that sports dietitians want to be doing. But feeding them is a big part of it, right? Like if we're talking about what kind of food we want to go into their body, then we also have to feed them. Some schools will have like a training table or like a student athlete cafeteria. We did not have that at UCLA. So I'm bringing in either like a campus caterer or outside restaurants for like post-practice meals. I'm running a fueling station that I have like interns working at that has like pre-practice snacks or maybe some recovery snacks, yogurt, PB&Js, fresh fruit, stuff like that. They'll make up shakes for athletes as well. Working with athletes, so I'm monitoring body composition throughout the year. If there are particular goals, we got an athlete that needs to put on size or maybe come down a little bit. I'll work with them on that and determining kind of like when's the appropriate time to address those goals, which would be out of season generally. And then how are we attacking that? So maybe they need to be coached up on what to eat. Maybe they need some additional support with resources on getting a meal prep or requiring more food. I'll do supplement reviews and supplement education and recommendations. So a lot of times, especially now with NIL, name, image, and likeness with athletes, a lot of supplement brands will approach them to work with them. They want them to put their face on it.
Interesting.
Athletes have to, follow really strict guidelines as far as what they can take in order to not potentially pop positive on a urinalysis. There's a lot of contamination within the supplement industry. So I might be educating them on, hey, this is probably not a good look because it's not appropriately tested. We don't know where it comes from or it could be contaminated. So that sort of thing. Really anything. I'll work a lot with, if there's athletes that has injuries, I'll be working with the athletic trainer to kind of coach them up, and we'll be having kind of talking in conjunction of how can we get this athlete, return to play from a nutrition standpoint and their standpoint, how we combo our services.
Yeah. So is that a urine analysis? Because I know that, at least because we teach people to pass the CSCS, and there's stuff in there that they'll tell you that is, as of 2024, athletes can and cannot take. But to a certain degree, caffeine is considered a banned substance. Is that something that they measure in their urine, and they're able to see, okay, you're past that? What is that limit?
Yeah. So I think from what I've seen, it has to be like, I want to say like 9 to 12 milligrams per kilogram body weight of a caffeine dosage within, it's got to be close enough to that competition time or testing time to still be peaked in that high in the bloodstream. But you have to do, I think, you have to take in a pretty good amount of caffeine in order to flag on a urinalysis.
You're going to have the jitters like nothing if that's the case.
You got to do a pretty high amount. It's got to be, I think, I want to see in studies that I've looked at, it's got to be at least 9 milligrams per kilogram.
Geez, that's crazy. And I did an internship at the University of Connecticut, and I remember being in line looking at the time, they called Ben Gordon the world's most fittest athlete. And the dude was just absolutely shredded. He was like 3% on the wall in the locker room. He could do like 225 for like 35 plus reps, just an absolute monster. But then you looked at what he ate, and you literally couldn't even imagine how terrible this food is. And so I always kind of use it as, not saying it's the case in point, but people will say things like, you can't outrun a bad diet. I'm like, well, yeah, you can, if you're working out 8 to 10 hours a day. Yeah. And these guys are just in phenomenal shape. Is the quality there? Absolutely not. But what are some, I mean, obviously can't use names, but like case examples where you see people just consuming a ton, or maybe the output is so high, but they're not consuming enough? What are some of those extremes, and how do you address it?
Yeah, I think I recently saw, I want to say it was like DK Metcalf or somebody like that said they eat like a big old bag of candy or something, that people were up in arms. But realistically, like, it's not the most ideal, but it's carbohydrates in a simple form, which is what you need before exercise like that, before, a performance like that. So, I would argue again that there's probably better sources. You can't outwork a bad diet, but you can also be so superhuman athletic and have trained so hard that you still perform well and still perform better than people. But I would argue, how much better could you yourself perform if you improved in that area? So I've certainly got a lot of athletes, especially when I was working with the Clippers, because at this point you've got athletes that have been playing the game for a long time. I've got athletes in their 30s. And so for me to come in and say, hey, everything you're doing is wrong and you do different, like, we're not going to get very far. So I've definitely have had athletes where we've kind of had to like do a little bit of a dance, where I had to kind of accept some of their not great habits. Like, I had one athlete who like refused to eat before practice ever. And he's a fantastic athlete, but he refused to eat before games. And so like, this is a guy who, like, I really needed to get some sort of fuel in him, because I can see him peter out in the second half of the game. Like, he's gassed. And so that took like a lot of trust building and rapport building for him to kind of like, hey, go with me on this, try this thing. I know it's different, and you've maybe thrown up in the past because you ate, but like, let me coach you up on how to get to this point where we can see the benefits and do it in a way where it's not going to affect you gastrointestinally.
That buy-in is huge, because like you're saying, and if you don't have that, then you're just going to keep on doing it the way. I have a client who, it's unique to me, but during the hour that we train, she can't drink water because she was a swimmer at Georgetown, and it would just, gave her a bad rep. And so she doesn't like it. So maybe she'll burp a little bit. So she never drinks water. It's the weirdest thing to me. And so, trying to find that, a little bit, or like even like a little shot thing, it's like trying to come up with something. But that's fascinating to hear. Now, I know big thing right now, people are, the two areas I wanted just to kind of chat on are protein consumption, and then also hydration. So starting with the latter there, when you have athletes who are sweating so damn much, what are we looking for with hydration? And or is that where we're suggesting supplementation, or is it more just, chloride, magnesium, potassium, sodium? What are we looking for there?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's sweat rate and sweat concentration is different. And then different training environments, different training conditions, can all affect someone's how much they're sweating and what we're losing in it. But I mean, you can look at an athlete and be like, all right, that athlete's a really sweaty, a big time sweater, right? So someone who's sweating more, they're losing more fluid, they're also losing more electrolytes. So they're probably going to want to supplement that, right? They're going to want to add in some sort of electrolytes pre, during, and or after in order to restore that hydration and store that fluid balance. So I know a lot of people kind of like look at the 200 or 2,300 milligrams being the general guidelines for sodium, but that's kind of out the window when we're talking about someone who's sweating profusely, right? But then you've got other athletes who maybe aren't as heavy as sweaters or not losing as much. They might not need to replace as much sodium. So they might be able to like have some salty snacks in their day and not necessarily be taking in a bunch of electrolytes. I know electrolytes are such a big thing right now, and they're certainly appropriate for athletes, but I'm seeing them kind of overused as well in conditions where we don't necessarily need it. If you're training indoors in an air conditioned environment and you're not a big sweater, you also probably don't need as much electrolytes. There's there's different ways to measure it. There's some like commercially available, like Gatorade has like little sweat patches you can put on your forearm, and that kind of will, I think you train for like 30 minutes and it measures both kind of an average output of your sweat and then also like your average of your sodium output. And it gives you some recommendations on what would be appropriate for you based on that specific training conditions. But if you take that same training conditions, maybe in that air conditioned environment, and now you're outside in the summer doing it, want to reassess.
Because I mean, there's rare cases where you sweat so much, hyponatremia can kick in and you just drinking water. And so are there toxicity levels from overconsumption of electrolytes?
For sure. It's going to be variable per person. If you're you can go too extreme in either way, right? Too much water, not enough sodium, too much sodium intake as well. But yeah, it'll be variable per person.
I'm being selfish right now because I had a goal that I wanted to run 100 miles for January. And so I've been running a lot and I sweat like a maniac. And so one of my clients added a little electrolyte thing and gave it to me. And I'm like, oh yeah, what? They never tell you like the upper limit on these. And so I'm like, oh, one's fine, two. Am I going to die if I have like 3 of these scoops?
No. I mean, and this is somewhere like we're talking about like hypertension for like a long term. I mean, there's certainly like acute toxicity. Yeah.
And then, so how about with the most famous macronutrient and protein? What is the current evidence saying right now? I know that, don't misconstrue this, trainers for your Gen Pop clients, but could there potentially be in the future? As I know we have kind of increased the recommendation, but could we suggest to our clients who General Pop to kind of emulate more of the athletic recommendation? Because right now the current, I believe, off of the ISSN recently, it was like almost like it's like 1.7 is what they're suggesting per gram per kilogram, right?
Yeah. We actually just had a recent study come out in December that we're looking at like protein intake during like one period of time. You used to be like 25 grams of protein is the upper limit and anything else is a waste. And we kind of said that's bullshit, and we knew it was more than that. But they recently did a study where they looked at 100 grams of protein in a single sitting, and they saw that they were able to metabolize and use all of that. And so we're looking at now kind of like taking those principles of like, all right, we want 20 to 35 grams of protein at each meal to like, you really could have a meal of 100 grams of protein and benefit from that. And especially if you're not like, if you're having maybe oatmeal in the morning and not getting in enough protein there. As far as the recommendations for athletes, I mean, I'm generally looking at so close to a gram per pound. So like 2.2 grams per kilogram of protein for gaining and maintaining muscle mass for your bigger athletes. So for I think that 0.8 grams per kilogram for the general population, I mean, that's a pretty low bar for sure. And many people can benefit from a higher intake of protein.
And so trainers, you have to be careful because you make a blanket suggestion where you have a client who's getting 30 grams and you say, oh, well, you just got to eat your body weight in protein. Well, you got to remember that's calories. And so athletics way different than general pop, and it's just getting the buy-in to let's start having 2 more eggs. So let's have something over here, and don't be so quick to the easy solution, which just have a protein shake. And, having whole food sources is always going to be better. Now, for the calculations, do you like to do that off of lean body mass, or is it just mass in general?
I would take into consideration, how much body fat this person may have, but generally for my athletes, I'm looking at body fat or body weight in general.
And then the big pushback people, it's always clients. It's funny because trainers are usually more open to learning. It's the clients who give me the most pushback. Well, I'm not going to have that much protein because it's bad for my kidneys.
Yes.
And there's even doctors that will tell them that. I had a buddy who, and here's the crazy thing is there's always like a little bit of truth to it. And he was a trainer and he had this nasty kidney issue, and he got it when he was in his early 20s and was admitted to the hospital, and he had kidney disease. And so the doctor told him that, and he was working with an RD, that we have to basically make sure that you're not consuming too much protein because this could be deadly for you within the circumstances. Makes perfect sense, right? There's renal stuff going on that we want to make sure that you're not going to make it worse. It's like someone who had an allergic reaction to peanuts. You have to be very, very careful on, that exposure. But the doctor, who was a specialist, and I believe it was at UCLA, said to him, "Oh yeah, protein supplements, it's just, those are terrible for your kidneys," and made that blanket suggestion or the recommendation to the athlete. And it's like, it's crazy that I think that's unfortunate where people then say all doctors are idiots. And obviously that's not the case. It's how do we disseminate from the medical standpoint, because they don't get much schooling in nutrition. You're the expert in nutrition, but then you have a lot of physicians who are high on their horse. Nutrition's not that fucking hard. It's just, it is what it is. So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, that's tough. As a child of a physician, I will say they are smart people, but they do not get nutrition education. They get like one class. Some may get more, and some may decide to educate them more. But just as we go back to like, trainers staying in their doing what they're trained to do, and like doctors are not, nutrition's not their thing. And of course, there's that health is a component, or nutrition is a component of health. And so they seem to be the experts, right? People will look to them as like, oh, whatever a physician says is the end all be all. And it's unfortunate that a lot of times like their opinions and their own biases often kind of interject into the nutrition recommendations I see oftentimes. It's hard, you've got to continue educating people in general of what different professions do. I think dietitians still, we're kind of like unless you've worked with one, you don't really necessarily know what a dietitian is or what we do or what we know. And there's a lot of distrust. Going back to that point about like building rapport and stuff with athletes. There's just so many people that have just they have a lot of food fears, or they have a lot of beliefs about nutrition or about how something works within their own body or things that aren't good for their body. And they're kind of set in that, right? And it takes a lot to get people out of their narratives, especially once you get a little bit older, right? And so I think we just got to keep kind of putting out good information. And then it's when you're ready to listen, then perhaps you will. But some people just simply aren't ready to listen or make a change, and they're not going to.
I think that's important to pick your battles, like even like family members. Like right now, it's like the year of politics. It's going to be a crazy year. It's like you don't want to ruin relationships. And I actually had a physician on the call, and he's a plastic surgeon in Beverly Hills, and he had some heart issues, some calcifications, a little bit of a heart attack, and he eliminated all red meat. So now he's vegan. And so every client that comes in, he pushes vegan on them. And now he's starting this like wellness thing. And I was just thinking, like, what am I going to get out of this to challenge him? Like he's set on this. And so it's like, okay, great. There's nothing wrong with that. It's helping you and you're feeling better, but at the same time, it's not the only way. And I think that's where we get in trouble with nutrition is people are like, you look at the waves, like right now the wave is fucking carnivore. And people ask me about it. I love that because your eye roll and it's like,
yeah,
if you've been doing this a while, you know that 20 years ago it was paleo, and then it's keto, and now it's carnivore. And what is your initial take because clients asked me this other day, said, "What are your thoughts on carnivore?" And I always just go, "What are your thoughts?"
yeah. Let me hear what you have to say first. You show your cards before I show mine.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think ultimately people are drawn. I was looking at an account right before coming on here. I was watching a video of someone just utter bullshit coming out of her mouth, but she has so many followers and she's a carnivore chick. And a lot of them are like that. They have so many followers, people listening. Why? Because they speak really confidently. They tell you, this will kill you. This is bullshit. People like that. People want to know, just tell me, I don't want to learn this shit. Just tell me what I need to know. Tell me what to do. And I will do that. People like the rules. That's why people like the paleo. People like, Atkins before that, because it comes with a set of rules. People like Weight Watchers, right? People want those rules and they want that guidance. And that's the tricky part about nutrition, is it's so nuanced, and it's like, you can't give blanket statements and recommendations and that sort of thing. But yeah, my opinion on carnivore is, any diet that's eliminating entire food groups is problematic to me. There's so many different nutrients that we get from a variety of different foods. Also, a lot of times they're pushing supplements on top of that, because they're noticing that there's things in the diet they're not getting enough of, because they've eliminated that. Supplements should be supplementing the diet, right? And then there's also the risk, obviously, of like cholesterol levels, increased LDL, from a lot of like saturated fat intake, as well with that. But just to like the whole idea of demonizing fruits and vegetables is like absurd to me. Like, I don't know how you don't just like click off right there. Like when someone's
It's
talking
scary.
about
It
like
really is.
kale will kill you. Like, how do you not just be like, all right, this person's clearly,
And
I don't
so
know. I don't understand.
I think maybe with keto, the initial attack was like, well, you're going to do terrible in any athletic performance because you need carbs for glycogen and so forth. And then they almost, it's like a war. They got their troops like, all right, so let's just put keto aside now. Let's come up with another monster carnivore and let's fucking go attack fruits and vegetables. Yeah. Bacterial and antifungal shit. And if you eat broccoli, you're going to die. It's like,
Yes,
we've really come that far. Holy shit.
we really have.
And
And then because our ancestors ate that way, or they died in their 30s.
Yeah, our ancestors weren't going to the moon. Their ancestors weren't, they weren't on fucking Zoom calls talking to.
Did we go to the moon either, though?
It's so crazy, but I just wanted to end off on this hypothetical. You said it, and I know some people hate this, but I like playing this game. But it's like, if you were to come up with a list and you were to have this perfect diet, even though there is no such thing, what would be some of those things that you would suggest for people?
So lean proteins. So poultry, fish, the less legs, the better, as far as like generally is what the recommendation, right? And then lots of plant proteins as well, I would include in there. So you got your beans, tofu, that sort of thing. Seeds, nuts, as well. I would include vegetables and fruit, and then whole grains. Whole grains, we're going to get fiber, get some more protein, get some more nutrients from there. So I would have those as a staple in the diet. I also like dairy. Dairy gets a lot of flack as well for an abundance of different reasons. But dairy is super beneficial, especially for athletes. We've got a lot of bone building nutrients in there. It's electrolyte rich as well. And of course, just from a protein standpoint, we've got both whey protein, we've got a slower digesting protein as well. So big fan of dairy for athletes. Yeah. So, and variety, right? Just not eating the same things. I see a lot of people, I come from like a bodybuilding background as well, where I used to do like the chicken, rice, broccoli in every meal. I advise against that. Variety is good. Get different nutrients from different foods.
That's great. Like if you put this into a workout trainer scenario, it's always the same. Like, I always like asking, like, what's the single best exercise? It's just fun to fuck around.
Yeah.
But like when it comes to it, it's like, okay, but at the end of it, it's the summary is going to be, you should push, you should pull, you should squat, you should hinge, you should carry, you should do unilateral things, you should be explosive. That's the takeaway. That's exactly what you just said for nutrition. It's like, okay, well, okay, get your protein, and it's so crazy that people will make this a lot more complex than it really should be, but I really appreciate you.
Then I gave you like something that was very kind of more generic and said a bunch of things when you asked for like, one thing, right? And that's why people don't like, they want the structure. They want the rules, because that's too hard. That's not clear enough. That's not clear enough. And to us, it sounds like, oh, that's practical, but it's not clear enough for the average human.
Brown rice and meat is way easier to follow, right? Throw in some asparagus, tilapia. There you go. That's what you're gonna eat for the rest of your life.
On repeat.
Well, I appreciate your time. This was awesome. Where can people find you?
Social media is Jessica, the sports RD for registered dietitian, mostly on Instagram, also TikTok, website, jessicathesportsrd.com.
Are you an artist as well?
No,
'Cause
why?
back there, it's a cool photo that you have with the
Oh,
mushrooms and
this is my daughter did this. I have a teenager. She did this.
wow, that is really, really impressive.
Super cool.
That is really great. I thought maybe that was something you're doing. So that's a
No, I
feature
wish.
for
I wish.
her.
No, that's the kiddo.
All right. Well, thank you for your time again, and we'll be chatting soon. Okay.
Awesome. Nice talking to you. Take care.